A Sapper Army was a multi-brigade military construction engineer formation organized by the Soviet Union's Red Army during World War II, formed to construct large-scale defensive works. Sapper armies were used from late 1941 until mid-1942, when the Red Army opted to organize smaller and more flexible construction engineer formations. Although the organization of military construction engineers into an army-level echelon was unusual, the use of dedicated troops for military construction was common to many armies of World War II history. Reeling from the German invasion of 1941, the Soviets decided to organize large military construction engineer formations to construct defensive works on a massive scale. The Soviets hoped such works would strengthen Red Army defensive operations and buy enough time to rebuild the forces for a counteroffensive. Consequently, the High Command ordered the formation of the first Sapper armies on October 13, 1941. Originally, 6 Sapper armies were formed, but by December 1941 this was expanded to 10 Sapper armies, numbered 1st through 10th. The Sapper armies were not only composed of military personnel, women, old men, schoolchildren and teenagers under the draft age were also mobilized to serve in the construction units. The Sapper armies worked to construct defensive lines that were made up of battalion and company strong points in the Moscow, Stalingrad, North Caucasus, and Volga military districts. Sapper armies also trained troops for the Red Army's engineers and consequently suffered a steady loss of qualified personnel. Dissatisfied with the relative lack of flexibility of the Sapper armies, the High Command disbanded 5 of them in February 1942 and used the released personnel for the formation of new rifle units. Confronted with the German summer offensive of 1942, the remaining Sapper armies built defensive works around Moscow and Stalingrad, and in the Caucasus. On July 26, 1942, the High Command directed the reorganization of the Sapper armies, and by October 1942, the remaining 5 Sapper armies had been converted into defensive construction directorates. The troops released by this measure were used to form new rifle and smaller engineer units. Historian David Lance assessed the effectiveness of the Sapper armies as having contributed significantly to the Red Army's victories at Leningrad, Moscow, and Stalingrad by preparing defensive lines, providing vital engineering support to the Red Army's operating fronts, and serving as a base for the formation of other more specialized engineer forces assigned to operating fronts. Organization. Sapper armies were made up of 2 to 4 Sapper brigades. A Sapper brigade controlled 19 Sapper battalions, each with 3 companies of 4 platoons. Sapper battalions had an authorized strength of 497 men, and included wood-cutting units, road and bridge-building units, units dedicated to the construction of defensive positions, and motorized tractor units. Fully manned, each Sapper army was authorized some 45,000 to 50,000 men. Deployment. 1st Sapper Army, assigned to Western Front from December 1941 until September 1942. On the 19th of November 1941, NKO order downsized the planned formation of a 1st Sapper Army to work on fortifications in Karelia to the 1st Separate Operational Engineer Group. On the 21st of December 1941, the Chief of Engineers of the Western Front, Marj. Gen. MP. Vorobev, requested the NKO to form another 1st Sapper Army to exercise more command and control over the 80 separate Sapper battalions on defense line construction west of Moscow. The army consisted of 10 Sapper brigades with 8 Sapper battalions each. 2nd Sapper Army, assigned to Arkhangelsk military district from October 1941 until February 1942. 3rd Sapper Army, assigned to Moscow MD from October 1941 until September 1942. 4th Sapper Army, assigned to Volga MD from October 1941 until May 1942. 5th Sapper Army, assigned to Stalingrad and North Caucasus MDs from October 1941 until March 1942. 6th Sapper Army, assigned to Volga MD and the Bryansk Front from October 1941 until September 1942. 7th Sapper Army, assigned to Volga and Stalingrad MDs from October 1941 until September 1942. 8th Sapper Army, assigned to North Caucasus MD and the Southern Caucasus and Transcaucasus fronts from October 1941 until October 1942. 9th Sapper Army, assigned to North Caucasus MD from October 1941 until March 1942. 10th Sapper Army, assigned to North Caucasus MD from October 1941 until March 1942.